Hey guys, it's Miss Thomas and Miss Kester here.
Hey.
And we are coming to talk to you about child safety red flags. And then we feel like this is valuable information for all of us as educators to kind of help us see and know what to look for when it comes to child abuse. And so this is a heavy topic. It's not the funnest topic that we would want to talk about, but it's something necessary for us to learn about. So, what is child abuse? Any recent act or failure to act on the part of a parent or caretaker which results in death, serious physical or emotional harm, sexual abuse or exploitation, or an act or failure to act which presents an imminent risk of serious harm. There are several types of child abuse. The ones that we are probably most familiar with are physical, emotional, and neglect, and also sexual abuse. Physical abuse is child abuse that is non-accidental infliction of physical injury to a child. So this could be bruises, fractures, or anything that results from hitting, punching, or anything like that, even burning, all those horrible things that we don't like to talk about. Emotional could be verbal, mental, or psychological abuse. So this is emotional abuse is any attitude, behavior, or failure to act that interferes with the child's mental health or social development. So a lot of times we might see this if a child is not receiving the mental health care that they need. That could be considered emotional abuse. But Ms. Kester may can add to this too, but a lot of these things that we're talking about fall more under neglect, which is a pattern of failing to provide for a child's basic needs. So that mental health thing that we just talked about would really fall under neglect in most cases. It is abuse through omission of not doing something resulting in significant harm or risk of significant harm. So there's different types of neglect. There's physical neglect, failure to provide food, whether appropriate clothing, supervision, or a safe and clean home. Medical neglect, which is failure to provide the necessary medical or dental care for a child's condition. Educational neglect, failure to enroll a school-aged child in school or to provide necessary special education. Allowing excessive absences from school would be an example of that. And then emotional neglect, which is failure to provide emotional support, love, and affection to a child, or exposure of a child to spousal, pet, or drug and alcohol abuse. And then, of course, sexual abuse is any sexual behavior with or sexual exploitation of a child. And we won't go into the details of all that. I feel like we're all adults and we probably kind of understand what that could look like.
So I want to add two things here. Just in terms of the definitions, each state has like legal statutes and definitions. And so like Ms. Thomas was saying, in North Carolina, ours tends to be the abuse definitions are a little more narrow and the neglect umbrella is a lot more broad. So most of the things that we see, unless it's blatant physical or sexual abuse, are going to fall under the neglect umbrella, like things related to substance abuse, even bruising that's caused from too harsh of discipline. Most of those things fall under neglect in the state of North Carolina. So that's what a lot of those are. And then in terms of educational neglect, I know it says failure to enroll a school-age child or to provide necessary special education, but kind of the way they view that is when the school or the education system has done all that they can, then DSS will kind of take it under their umbrella as a neglect investigation or to look into it. So for us, if we file truancy charges or truancy petition, then that's when we can make a report to DSS for not attending school. I just wanted to clarify those two things.
Okay, thank you. So what are the signs of child abuse? We know now that there's different types of child abuse, and a question you might ask is, what should you be looking for? And there are actually social and physical signs of abuse that can help us as educators or anyone really to raise those red flags that something isn't right. So we're going to go over those now. So some social signs of child abuse includes showing sudden changes in behavior or school performance, They may not receive the physical or medical help that they need, and even if it's brought to the parents' attention, they may not take them to the doctor. So I know we've seen that case here several times. They may have learning problems or difficulty concentrating that cannot be attributed to specific physical or psychological causes. They could always be watchful, as though they were preparing for something bad to happen, so they could be paranoid or just extremely fearful. They could lack adult supervision when they're at home, or they could be overly compliant, passive, or withdrawn. So anything that is to the extreme where that's concerned could be a social sign of child abuse. They could come to school or other activities early. They could stay late and not want to go home. They could be reluctant to be around a particular person or show sudden regression in developmental tasks. So what that might look like is a child who all year long has been able to tie their shoes, and then suddenly they can't do it. Something that they should know, or they've been able to add 2 + 2 all year long, and then suddenly they can't do it. Or they could even just disclose the maltreatment. Anything you want to add to that?
That's
pretty good. All right. And then physical signs of child abuse. They may have unexplained burns, bites, bruises, broken bones, or black eyes, fading bruises or other marks noticeable after an absence from school. They may seem frightened of the parents and protest or cry when it's time to go home. They may shrink at the approach of an adult or touch. They could report injury by a parent or another adult caregiver. They may abuse animals or pets. And they may frequently be absent from school. They may beg or steal food or money. They may lack needed medical or dental care, immunizations, or glasses. And they may be consistently dirty or have severe body odor, as well as lack sufficient clothing for the weather. So it could be 40 degrees outside and they don't have a coat, or they come dressed in shorts and flip-flops. And as far as abuses alcohol or other drugs, I know we don't really see that as much at our age level, but it could be that they have a caregiver that is allowing them access to these kinds of things. And they may state that there's no one at home to provide care. Okay. And then also there's signs with the parent. Parents may deny the existence of or blame the child for the child's problems in school or at home. So these are things that we want to look for from the parent side of things. They may ask teachers or other caregivers to use harsh physical discipline if the child misbehaves. Now, we all know those parents who says, just whoop them. That's not what we're talking about here. We know when parents are closer to us and they have that relationship with us, they may joke and pick, but this could be something a little different. This could be more, they mean what they say when they say, make them sit out of this or things like that. They may see the child as entirely bad, worthless, or burdensome. So if you call them every time and they're like, what'd they do now? And they have literally no support for their child, that may be a red flag for us to kind of investigate or to look at. They may demand a level of physical or academic performance the child cannot achieve. And they may look primarily to the child for care, attention, and satisfaction of their own emotional needs, or show little concern for the child. So sometimes you may notice this type of maltreatment or certain attitudes from the parent directly towards this child or their child. Don't ignore those signs. I know we all had those parents who have just kind of neglected their child in our eyes. So if you have concerns like that, that's definitely something that we need to be paying attention to. Is there anything you want to add?
I was just thinking especially about seeing a parent who sees a child as, bad or worthless or burdensome, that usually most parents find some good. But when you're talking to those parents and they really can't find anything positive
Mhm.
at a conference or on the phone, that just kind of fits with that red flag there. I think about that.
All right, I am going to turn this over to Miss Kester.
All right. So we talked a lot about these kind of signs or red flags, and each child's unique, and you have to look at it within a bigger picture. One particular thing doesn't mean that there's something going on, but definitely a conversation to take place and to talk about. So we're going to kind of talk about what you do from here. All right, so steps to take, and we've talked amongst ourselves here, and the first thing is to have a conversation or to notify your social and emotional crisis team, which is new, but we're calling ourselves the SEC team. But basically, to have a conversation, and that is with Miss Dellinger, the principal, or Miss Davis, one of the two of them, myself, and Mrs. Thomas, the counselor, to have a conversation with us to kind of figure out what we're seeing, and does it warrant some next steps for making a DSS report. And so from there, if we do decide that it needs a DSS report, we are going to, we'll talk a little bit about making that report, but there's actually a form that we've created to kind of help us keep track of this. So the form can be something that you do online. It's a Google form online if you want to fill it out. It's very brief. It's basic information. We're going to walk you through that in just a second. But it just helps us kind of keep track of who we've made a report on, and then allows Ms. Thomas and I to do some follow-up from that point. There's also a handwritten version if you're more comfortable just jotting it down and giving it to one of us. So it sounds fancy, but it's a very short form called the DSS report documentation form. So this is when we've decided that we want to make a DSS referral, and the form. We'll share it with you. It'll be available in the drive, but basically it just goes through demographics. So whatever date this is occurring on, name. These are the questions that when a report is made, DSS is going to ask you. So we tried to put the things down in writing so that making the report will be easy. Should we talk about here who's going to make the report?
Sure, yeah. So in the state of North Carolina, we are all mandated reporters. And, Ms. Kester or myself and Ms. Dellinger will obviously support you in making the report. It's not something that we are expecting you to do on your own, but best practices is that the person who has heard it firsthand or receives the most knowledge about the incident should be on the call to make the report. So that's something that we can do together, but.
Right. So we'll do that. We don't mind doing that with you if it means we need to help pick up coverage somewhere. We can have that conversation between us and Ms. Ellinger or Ms. Davis and kind of decide. But whoever's either witnessed whatever's gone on or heard the child speak about something needs to be involved in that if at all possible, because those are the questions they ask. Mm-hmm. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. But this form is just intended to kind of guide you through that, because when you make a report, they usually ask you, it's a kind of a formed questionnaire that they'll go through on the phone when you make a report. It's generally not a very long process, but this form just helps you get everything together. So it's a lot of demographics, the student of concern, date of birth, any other children in the home. They're going to ask for one or both caregivers if you know that, and their names and dates of birth. If you don't have information, it's okay. If you call in, sometimes we don't even know correct addresses, or we don't even know what other adults might be in the home, and that's fine. But as much information as we can give, they're going to ask for. Mm-hmm. Definitely the family's address and any phone numbers that they have listed in Power School, or how we get in touch with them. Then they're going to ask you after all that, what specifically are you concerned about, or what specifically happened? And that's where the person on the other end is going to be typing to know exactly what you heard or saw, and just any basic information. So anything you can include there will be good.
Yeah, and this is basically, why are you making the report? So right. What is your concern? What did you notice, or what did the child tell you? And then we just kind of ask, if you're filling this out, to be as descriptive as possible, so that we have a record of what we're sharing with that DSS report.
And then they'll ask you, a lot of times they ask you for any strengths of the family or anything that you know that they're doing well for the child or family. They usually ask a question about, are there any dangers that you're aware of? And that has to do with them sending a worker out. So, you know, any interactions you've had that might cause you to be concerned about somebody's safety. And a lot of times we don't know of those, but it's, you know, a question they'll ask. What you would like to see happen. I know that seems very, it almost seems like a silly question, but what would you like to see happen? And usually it's to assure that the child is safe or that whatever's happened is checked into, that sort of thing. And then would you like to be notified? Typically we say yes, and they'll ask you if a letter is okay. So that allows us to get some documentation back at the school to show what has happened. We'll kind of go into that in a little more detail. So that is the form. Like I said, you can do it online or a handwritten version, and we'll walk you through it. It's just to kind of help us keep track of who we've made those calls on.
And you will be able to send yourself a copy of the form too, just so you have that for your records. And then, of course, the SEC team or the social emotional crisis team will have access to your report as well, so that we can keep that on file.
Mm-hmm. Great. So then we talked about, you know, mandated reporters and who it's best that the person that saw it be involved or that heard it. So also just keep in mind, you don't have to have factual basis. I mean, you don't have to have every single fact in front of you. If you have reasonable suspicion or a reason to suspect that abuse or neglect has happened, it's fine to report it. You know, you're not going to get in trouble for making a report that maybe wasn't abuse or neglect, but we could be held responsible for not reporting what is abuse or neglect. So just keep in mind reasonable suspicion, and just keep in mind that also we're the voice for children. Okay, so just some basic information about reporting, just so you have the number. The number to call during working hours, which is listed as 8 to 5 on weekdays, is listed here for you. And that is the report that will go straight to the intake worker to take a Child Protective Services report. So you don't have to go through the automated voice system. So after hours, weekends, holidays, nighttime, you're actually going to call Lincoln County's non-emergency communications number and ask for an on-call social worker. If you tell them you need to make a Child Protective Services report, they will usually take your number down and have an on-call social worker call you right back. I know that there's probably not going to be a lot of times that school staff are needing to do those, but just in case you need to know that, that's how you reach them after hours too. So we make a referral or a report to DSS. What happens next? So here are kind of what happens. So if the report is, so there's a screening tool that they use when you call in. They actually have a screening tool that's based on law that they go through, and they either screen the case in for an investigation or an assessment, or they screen it out. You should get notified either way. The school should get notified, or the reporter, over whether they accepted that to look into or they did not. So if it is deemed a case of abuse or neglect, they're going to set aside a time frame to begin assessing it. If it's an abuse case, or if it's deemed more imminent or serious, they will usually begin those within 24 hours. They can't even come out immediately if needed. I've known them to come to a school before to try to be able to speak to a child before the school day ended. So it can start as soon as a couple of hours, but usually abuse cases are initiated within 24 hours. If it's deemed a neglect assessment, then it usually begins within 72 hours. That means they have the full 72 hours to start it. They don't always wait that long. And an assessment or an investigation will include seeing the family, seeing the children, a home visit. Sometimes it may also include a school visit to see the child without the parents. It depends on the situation, but they are going to be interviewing the child and family members.
And something you mentioned when you said that you've known them to come out to the school, I think that's just another nod to the fact that we need to make this report as soon as possible, because it could be a case where they need to come to the school and meet with that child before they go home. And I think I don't know that we put it in the report form, but a lot of times the intake worker may ask, are they in imminent danger?
Mhm.
And so if you feel like if they go home that stepdad is going to beat them, then that means that child is in imminent danger. If it's maybe more so that they don't have clean clothes, that's not necessarily imminent danger. So that would be more of a neglect case within the 72 hours, kind of like what Ms. Kester was just talking about.
That's right. They do usually ask that question if you think the child's in immediate danger. So that's your time to say so if you think so. All right. So if they do accept it and they do either an investigation or an assessment, then here are some possible outcomes. Usually those are completed within 30 to 45 days, depending on how it was screened in, whether it was abuse or neglect. Sometimes there's a reason to ask for an extension, but generally around a month to a month and a half, there is an outcome. And so one outcome is that there's no finding of abuse or neglect. They did not deem it to meet after they went out and did their assessment and called collaterals and saw family members. They did not think it was a case of abuse or neglect. Sometimes they're able to put services in place that short assessment window that they're in the home. That means they don't need any type of ongoing services. So another option is that they do feel like there was neglect or abuse, and they send the family to have what's called an in-home services worker. So that's kind of continuing case management with DSS. And that's where a social worker is assigned that stays with the family. There's no set amount of time for this. A lot of times it can go on several months. I know that we have had some students here and still do right now that receive some of those ongoing services where social workers are keeping up with them and have been for several months. So the goal of that is to keep working with the family in the home and prevent the need for anything, any type of removal or anything more serious. They want to alleviate those concerns. So another option is that if they feel like it's serious enough and that the children do not need to remain in the same environment, they may ask the parents to voluntarily consent to the child living in some type of a safety placement. And the term for those are temporary safety placements with kin, and that can be relatives or known people to the child. I know that we have several of those in our school right now living in kind of alternative family situations with family members or folks that the family knows that are safety resource placements. Those are not legal custody. Those are usually ones that we get some kind of letter at the school saying that they're living with these people, and they can come with all kinds of stipulations. Sometimes the parents can have contact, sometimes they cannot, but it's a case by case situation there with that. And also it's up to DSS to kind of communicate with the school to say, the parameters around the parents, if they can be involved or not. But those are meant to be temporary. The goal is that they kind of alleviate those concerns and are able to get the child back with the parent or the caregiver. So that's another outcome that we have seen. And then the kind of the most serious, and I would say probably the most rare outcome, is that if a child is in imminent risk or danger, that the child or children can be removed from the home. And that's custody removed from the parents. That involves court action, and usually that they're placed in foster care or some type of other placement. I know we've had that happen too, but that tends to happen least, than all the choices. And they usually try to find those temporary safety placements to avoid that if possible. So one little reminder here about information sharing. I know we get a lot of questions and we have a lot of frustrations around information to and from DSS. So just keep in mind, DSS is bound by HIPAA. So they cannot release information about a child or family's case unless it's what's called a need to know basis. And that gets very frustrating because we want to know what's going on. We want to know what happened. But unless it directly affects safety at school or arrangements at school, then you're really not supposed to share those details with us. So if it involves, of course, things that the school needs to know, like placement with someone or who can and cannot have contact or anything that affects their education, those are the types of things they can share with us. But just a reminder on their rules around confidentiality are they have their own set of rules and they're bound by HIPAA. So just a reminder there. All right. So after we've made a report as a SEC team, or after this has happened, if we're unsatisfied, what happens next? Like if we just don't feel like the response that needed to happen happened. So there is kind of a process for that. If they determine that the case doesn't meet statute and is not going to be accepted for an investigation or assessment, you can call have a conversation about that. And they do want the reporter to be involved in that. So we as a team can do that. The person that made the report, there will be a supervisor's name listed on that letter you get saying that it was not accepted as a report. You can call and ask for clarification on why that wasn't accepted and make sure that they had all the info that they needed. And I have done that a couple of times this year, as a matter of fact, and been able to reach someone and gotten some more clarification on why it didn't meet the statute. And she's actually talked me through being able, if I had more information on making another report and making sure I included the right information. So if you're still not satisfied after that, you can contact the DSS director either at the county level, at the county level, and state your concern. And if you're still not satisfied at the local level, there is a child welfare policy consultation team that is through like the North Carolina Division of Social Services, and there's a number there, and you can ask to be directed to speak to someone about that. So that's kind of the level, the places you can go if you're not satisfied with what's happened. So as we kind of wrap up here, we just wanted to leave you with some tips for you as educators and as people who are working with the children every day for how you can best support a child that has been involved in a situation of abuse or neglect. We have a lot of children that we know have had social workers or have had assessments going on or had to live in alternate placements. So how can we best support those? And the things that we're suggesting are to be approachable and to actively listen. They often need somebody to hear them and to really listen. Maintain expectations and set reasonable goals. It's important just to provide the support needed so that each child is able to feel confident in his or her ability. So oftentimes school is the place, and you all know this, that children are able to rebuild their self-esteem and assert themselves and be successful. So we want to continue to nurture that. Provide structure and provide accurate information. So a lot of times children in these situations that are from any kind of trauma feel very powerless. We see these coping mechanisms that are not healthy, but we see them sometimes refuse to even try to control what happens around them. They may try to manipulate things to gain some of that sense of control, express disproportionate feelings whenever they feel threatened. They kind of go to some of those survival responses. Sometimes we may feel like they fly off the handle easily. They're oftentimes doing these things to establish some control. So if we help them to establish that control in a positive manner, it will help them build trust. So allowing expression of feelings when appropriate through art, music, drama, creative writing are also going to be ways to give them some control. A lot of times they just have a lot of emotion in there. Point out strengths to help a child gain a sense of personal identity. Children from these types of situations oftentimes were abused in ways that met an adult's need and denied the child's need. And so they weren't able to establish that sense of personal identity. So you as teachers can help by pointing out their strengths. I mean, really naming them. And it maybe even may seem like the simplest things, but you're such a hard worker. I see you being a good friend, helping people with problems. People in this classroom like you because, and then list the positive attributes of a child. Just helping them gain that positive identity.
All right, and then support and boost self-esteem. So abused children sometimes have little self-esteem, and teachers can help them learn that they are valued, accepted, and capable by fostering that environment that honors that child's uniqueness. Valuing differences will enable the child to begin to see themselves as having something to contribute that others appreciate. And I know we all, as teachers and educators, work really hard to boost our students' self-esteem. So I think you guys already do a wonderful job of that, but just be mindful that if a child has experienced some level of child abuse or trauma, that this is a really important piece to the puzzle. Also, by facilitating a sense of belonging, a child who's been abused may think that they've done something wrong or that they're bad because they've kept a secret from everyone. They may assume there is a reason for them to be isolated from others. So we need to make sure we're facilitating a sense of belonging. making them feel at home, so to speak. Placing possessions and displaying work in the classroom, and making a conscious attempt to include these children in classroom activities. We're always supporting our students by developing social skills, but this is definitely something that we as teachers need to foster as well, because abused children have not learned to listen to their inner selves yet. They may focus on pleasing and meeting the needs of others while neglecting their own needs. And having been introduced to the adult world through an abusive relationship, the child may have learned inappropriate behaviors and language. And so the child may feel unworthy to interact on an equal basis with others, or may fear rejection. So a classroom climate that fosters caring, appreciation for differences, and consistent rules and boundaries is one that can nurture a child who has been through these experiences. Also, being tolerant of differences. Every child will respond in a unique way to abuse. So just because you had one student one year who went through a traumatic experience doesn't mean that the next child who's gone through the same thing is going to respond to it in the same way. So we need to be mindful of that, and remember that Ms. Kester and I are here to support you, as well as Ms. Dellinger and Ms. Davis, and anything that you need. We want to have an open line of communication with you. And so anything that you need as far as tips or ideas or strategies to use with these students, we're here for you. And then, as always, consistency is key. So we as educators can support a child's need for structure by maintaining a consistent daily schedule. I think we do a great job of that here at Union. And also by maintaining those clear expectations that Ms. Kester talked about.
So I know that as we wrap up here, I know that a lot of this is already part of practice, and that it's kind of how we operate. We just wanted to kind of get it on paper for you, so to speak, or on computer for you, and just to kind of be mindful of these signs. And just like Ms. Thomas said, just a reminder that we're here to kind of talk them through with you, and just kind of try to put it together as a whole picture for a child, and just do what we need to do. So we're not trying to add another thing to a to-do list, just trying to think of a way that we could keep track more of some of these social and emotional concerns, and make sure we're doing all that we can. So if you have questions, please email us. Of course, we're here. Come find us, ask us questions. But I think we appreciate your time, and I think that's it.
All right. Thank you,
Thanks.
guys.